Hello and welcome to my presentation on Simone Weil, a social philosopher. Just a quick agenda of the presentation. First, I'm gonna give a little background on Simone Weil, and then I'm gonna talk a little about her last book, The Need for Roots, moving on to Weil and Marx concepts of labor, and then finally finishing off with some evaluations. So Simone Weil was born into an intellectual Jewish family in Paris 1909. Her brother was a distinguished mathematician. Despite not feeling like she had the same level of endowment like her brother, she was very intelligent and displayed a deep curiosity for knowledge from a young age. She was deeply interested in science, literature, history, Greek, and philosophy. At the age of 15, she passed her baccalaureate and entered the prestigious École Normale Supérieure, excuse my French, one of France's top schools in the pursuit of knowledge, and soon after she became a teacher. Simone Weil lived in a golden age of a public philosopher, and despite this, she made no intimations of becoming one. She was in fact a philosopher unfettered by imposed boundaries. While she was a teacher, she felt a deep connection to the working class, a yearning to understand not only just their struggles, but to share it with them. Despite the economic despair of the 1930s, she began identifying with the working class, and she shared their conditions as much as possible. Weil restricted her own income by distributing the balance of her salary among the needy, so much so that on payday a queue would form outside her door. And this action was a defining one of her. It became the theme of her existence. As we see personal deprivation, the idea of reaching a kind of knowledge and unity with mankind by undergoing its sufferings. Thus, for Weil, intellectual empathy wasn't enough. She wanted to actually experience firsthand the struggles of industrial labor and its consequences on the human body and spirit. To help her understand the quality of existence under the strains of production, this is why many say she didn't fit in any mold, only of that created by the dictates of her own spirit. She wasn't an observer, she actively participated to become an indistinguishable part of anonymous mass. For her, this was a personal quest for spiritual enlightenment and mystical identification, as Elizabeth Hartwig states, insisting to absorb the quality of existence under the strains of production firsthand. Following her experience, she said that she came away from the factory forever a slave. And this quote over here, I'll read it to you. It sums her experience and what she took out the whole year she worked in a factory, being part of the working class. As I worked in the factory, indistinguishable to all eyes, including my own, from the anonymous mass, the affliction of others entered into my flesh and soul. Nothing separated from it, for I had forgotten my past and looked forward to no future, finding it difficult to imagine the possibility of surviving all fatigue. What I went through there marked me in such a lasting manner that still today when any human being, whoever he may be, in whatever circumstance, speaks to me without brutality, I cannot help having the impression that there must be a mistake, and that the mistake will all improbability disappear. And by many, Simone Weil was referred to as a saint. T.S. Eliot famously said that Weil is the greatest saint of the 20th century. In her last book, published after her death, she explored the concept of ruthlessness and its impact on modern society, and argued for the importance of rudeness in cultivating a sense of meaning and purpose in life. Weil saw that the loss of traditional values and social structures had left many people feeling disconnected and adrift, with no sense of purpose or direction. Thus, she emphasized on the importance of rootedness as a means of providing stability and continuity in life. Rootedness can be found for her in a variety of contexts, including family, community, religion, and even culture. Alongside that, work was an important factor in cultivating an absence of purpose and contributing to the common good for people. Most importantly, she argued that work should be seen as a form of service rather than simply as a means of earning a living, and that social and economic justice are necessary for creating a just and equitable society, and are closely tied to the concept of rootedness. Overall, the need for roots was Simone Weil's passionate call for greater rootedness and responsibility in modern society. Simone Weil retained a strong interest in several Marx problems, especially in that of the strange labor. However, her moral metaphysical aspirations were not met by Marx's answers to human problems. The key similarity between Weil and Marx was that they both saw labor as a central human activity. Weil believed it was how humans connected with the world and potentially experienced that transcendent, and Marx viewed it as a foundation of society and the source of human value. The views were similar in the critique of capitalism, both highlighting that capitalism alienated workers from the product of their labor. Weil saw it as dehumanizing and creating a superior slave relationship. And Marx's most original idea of alienation of labor noted that the aim of work is only production, and the worker becomes a simple means to it, also leading to class struggle. Note here that going back to Kant's categorical imperative, the second formulation particularly points out to treat rational beings as an end itself, never as means. However, Marx points out that alienation of labor does this exactly. It treats the worker as a means to it. Here this defeats the purpose of Well's concept, the need of rootedness, and that work should be seen as a form of service rather than simply a means of living. Despite this similarity in Well and Marx's dignity of labor, they had very different manner in which they conceived of the relationship between thought and action. While Marx was focused on the material conditions of labor and the need for social change, Well's main concern was the spiritual impact of labor and its ability to connect people to a higher purpose. And unlike Marx's focus on the class struggle, Well believed oppression wasn't limited to capitalism. She felt it was a deeper human condition requiring individual transformation and even the rejection of force in all forms. Overall, while they both valued labor and critiqued capitalism, their approaches were very different, with Well focusing on the soul and individual experience, while Marx concentrating on the social structures and economic transformations. And now moving on to some evaluations. Robert Sparling, in his journal Simone Weil and Marx on the Dignity of Labor, states that Weil comes across as a somewhat superficial reader of Marx. She opposes Marx's idea of labor as an activity, criticizing him that he wished to eliminate labor and had poor understanding of class, and that he placed excessive hope on an unjustified historical theology. Sparling argues that Well's disagreement with Marx stems from a different conception of what makes labor free and dignifying rather than from the different levels of respect for labor as an activity. And these clashing views are due to the underlying disagreement of the relationship between thought and action, or as Sparling explicitly states, between being and becoming. I believe that is truth to Robert Sparling's view of Well's criticism to Marx's idea, and in a way it could be seen as subjective to her own perspective and experience. Thus, I think it fails to acknowledge the material aspects of life and the power struggle between classes. However, I think that one of the main differences between Well's and Marx's views is that she identified the work alienation as slavery, noting that this is a social degradation as industrial labor is made to reduce the individual to a non-thinking entity, resulting in him being a slave. Her observations were based on experience, and I think that this experience of something is much more generally experience of something is much more eye-opening and exposes you to the concept completely and physically, giving you a better understanding of its outcomes. Weil was unique for the fact that she took action and found herself not content to only the theoretical side about something she's concerned, but also the actions of it. And despite being physically unfit for physical labor, she wasn't struck by that, and often being described as awkward and clumsy, she struggled with a factory work, but made a significant amount of effort in her dealings with the physical world despite that. Lastly, I think that her revelation that industrial labor was less about the physical suffering and fatigue and more of the humiliation it caused. But the humiliation also did not produce rebellion as she expected, but instead obedience, which is noted as modern slavery. This revelation highlights the core concept of capitalism and industrial labor, I think, where superiors are able to control the mass, and then the mass is not able to fight back as they're put in the inferior position. Overall, I would like to end this presentation by noting that Simone Weil was a very extraordinary social philosopher, and hence why many quote and refer to her as a saint. And despite the short life of 34 years, she was in the pursuit of knowledge. She was persistent with finding truth and justice, and really a true activist, I may say.